Monday night wasn't just a national championship. We saw one of the most improbable seasons of college football come to an end and culminate in what was a fantastic national championship game. One of the better national championship games I've seen as of late. And it was a joy to watch. Both Miami and Indiana brought it. Indiana threw some haymakers, Miami punched back, and it came down really to the wire where I thought Miami was going to have a shot here. They were driving towards the goal line, but then obviously the defense for Indiana came up clutch. Carson Beck made a bad read, threw a pick. Indiana comes out on top. Indiana goes 16-0. The first team in modern college football history to do it. Obviously, there haven't been 16 games up until last year to where a team could do that here with the 12-team playoff, but Indiana goes undefeated and runs the table. In this modern NIL transfer portal era, that is insanely hard to do. It's a credit. It's amazing what Kurt Signetti and his staff were able to put together this season. Unreal. Chris Fowler, I think, put it best when we talk about the history of Indiana. A century of futility is forgotten. Indiana, one of the losingest programs in college football history. I think 692 losses in their programs, 127 years. And like you said, it's forgotten for good. Indiana is now the king of college football. Who would have thunk it? This wasn't just Indiana winning a title. This was the sport watching a program rewrite its entire identity in one night, one season. And I think a lot of programs are sitting there thinking, you know what? How can we get a slice of that pie? How can we recapture at least some of what Indiana just did this year? And I think now with the NIL and the transfer portal, it's possible. Is it easy to replicate? No, but it's possible. So without further ado, let's dive into my reaction of this national championship game. So the final score, obviously 27-21. Indiana gets the win over Miami. Fantastic game, as I already mentioned, came down to the wire. Early on, it looked like Indiana was going to pull away. It was 10-zip at the end of the half, but Miami was able to swing back and stay with it and ultimately bring it down to the wire. Before we dive into some of the X's and O's, just some historic context. Chris Fowler called this the most unexpected championship matchup he has ever been a part of. And it holds true. Both of these teams were, like 100-1 long shots earlier this season. Not at all likely that they were going to go to the college football playoff or be playing in the championship at the very least. Indiana, as I already mentioned, one of the losingest programs historically in college football. 692 total losses. 692 total losses coming into this season out of their 127 years as a program. Miami, no title since the early 2000s. It's been about a quarter. It's been a quarter of the century since Miami last won a national championship. All that history and tradition is long forgotten, and they wanted to get back into it. Well, they have arrived. The good news is Mario Cristobal, credit to him and his staff. They brought a hard-nosed edge back to Miami defense. Their run game was fantastic, and Carson Beck, he had a pretty good second half of the season that ultimately led them to that point. And I thought he was going to lead a final touchdown drive. I think a lot of us were kind of thinking he was going to pull it off. And then they got to play for a championship in their own stadium. How cool is that? What a cool storyline. I obviously missed the Orange Bowl that Miami used to play in, but nonetheless, a cool storyline there. And Indiana did a great job. Once again, their fans traveling, their marching band playing the cool Lord of the Rings themes.
Brought down by D'Angelo Pond. Gain of 3. 2nd and 7 at the 9.
They won some major bonus points for me there. And this game symbolized ultimately the new era of college football. The transfer portal, NIL, and rapid rebuilds, I think, are now possible due to the transfer portal and NIL. That to me, I think this is still, it's going to take a lot of conditions for what we saw this season to actually happen. I think a lot of things have to go right, and ultimately, there's only one Kurt Signetti. So even if a team does throw a ton of money at their college football program, even if they do bring in a high-profile coach, it ultimately comes down to the players and the type of team cohesion that they have. Just so happens that Indiana had the perfect blend of stud players, guys that were older veterans who came in with a lot of experience and production. Kurt Signetti highlighted production over the caliber of recruit, and they were all humble and unselfish, and they all came together for a common goal, spearheaded by Fernando Mendoza. He said it over and over again. We all came together for a common goal. I swear that was one of his you got to trademark it this season. That was his whole thing. And it was beautiful to watch. The team was just fighting for each other, receivers running down fields to make unselfish blocks, running backs putting their bodies on the line for Fernando Mendoza. His O-line was fantastic. And Fernando Mendoza, we'll touch on one of his plays later. It was a Heisman play, and he said, I will die for my teammates. I'll put my body on the line for these guys. I love every one of them. And that's going to be really tough to replicate. I think with the NIL era, there's a lot of selfishness floating around. I get it. Players want to get theirs, but at the end of the day, you have to sacrifice for the goal of the team sometimes. And that's what we saw in Indiana. So all that to say, I don't think it's just going to be, oh, you throw a bunch of money at a program and you bring in a good coach and suddenly we get a national championship. It's not the case. And sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. That's football. So let's get into the actual game. The game flow, how it actually played out. Indiana, like I said, dominated the tone early. It was 10-zip towards the end of the first half. I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be a blowout once again. Miami had under 70 total yards in the first half. They couldn't run the ball. The defensive line for Indiana, the front seven was swarming Miami's massive offensive line, and they were plugging the gaps. Numerous times, Miami was trying to convert from 3rd and short. Couldn't do it. Indiana's defensive line was winning the battle in the trenches. And then Indiana, they didn't put up a ton of points. They only put up 10 points. They were still able to march the ball down the field numerous times and put points on the board. And when you're down 2 possessions to Indiana, that's just it feels like you're down 20. And that's what it felt like going into the half for Miami. Can't run the ball, and Indiana got the ball to start the third quarter. It was just not looking good. But the early third quarter, Miami's defense comes out and gets a stop. They get the ball back to Miami, and they're able to put a 57-yard touchdown run from Marcus Fletcher on the board.
Great job corralling number 10, not letting him get loose. Fletcher breaks free. Mark Fletcher in a foot race. Miami touchdown.
Shout out to the offensive line for Miami. I thought in the first half, obviously, Miami's offensive line was not looking great. They were inconsistent. Indiana's defensive line was getting pressure on Carson Beck on 3rd and long situations, and they were just sitting back in a covered shell, basically saying, you try throwing it to the short stuff here. We're going to take it away. And he wasn't able to get any rhythm. But in the second half, they sprung to life. So credit to them for not just giving up and giving in. Fast forward to later in the game, with like 5 minutes left at the 5:04 mark, Indiana blocks a punt.
Joyce back on. Blocked! Indiana blocks the punt and falls on it for a touchdown. Isaiah Jones on the recovery.
Mikhail Kamara blocks the punt, and then Indiana's able to fall on it and put 7 more on the board. They go up 17-7. Once again, I kind of thought, oh, there it is. There's no coming back from that. And I guess to an extent that's right, but Miami would come back. They score another touchdown, long extended drive going into the fourth quarter. They score at the 14:57 mark. Fletcher once again punches it into the end zone on a 3-yard touchdown run. But then the Heisman moment happens later in the fourth at the 9-minute mark. Fernando Mendoza did this.
To the 8. He's going to take off and run. Mendoza weaves his way first and goal, diving toward the end zone. Touchdown! That's why he won the Heisman Trophy.
Curt Cignetti and the offensive coordinator, Mike Shanahan. Quarterback draw. He definitely breaks the plane, holds on to the football for a touchdown.
What a gutsy call. I mean, first off, the call itself. Indiana is thinking about bringing the field goal unit onto the field, which would have made it 20-14. And they just didn't feel good about it. Curt Cignetti, had to call a timeout, and then they come out with this fourth down call. I believe it was 4th and 5, and Mendoza, they go with the quarterback draw. He finds his way through, meandering through his offensive line. They blocked it well enough. The safeties for Miami, if they had both come down at the same time, maybe they're able to make the stop, but either way, Mendoza's able to dance his way through the field and into the end zone, and he put his body on the line for his guys to punch it into the end zone. That was one of the best plays I've seen in a championship in recent memory. But then Carson Beck and Miami, they punch back in a few minutes' time, the 6th minute, 30-second mark. They complete another touchdown pass to Tony, a 22-yard touchdown, and it's 24-21 again. And then they hold Indiana to a field goal, and Miami has a minute 42 to drive down the field and score. And it looked like they were going to do it until Carson Beck made this poor read.
Brown is the back. Beck sets up, delivers downfield, intercepted! Jamari Sharp makes the pick that will clinch Indiana's first national championship. He spotted the football.
Yeah, I think he might see middle field safety thinking he's got one-on-one right here. So as he throws it, the safety's going to work over here to help out. Now it's a 2-on-1. The corner knows he has help so he can trail. Doesn't feel the urgency to have to stay upfield with Marion. He knows the safety's coming over. Now he locates the football, staying in zone. Indiana's been doing this all year. That's why they're number one.
So with that interception, it was done. Miami's hopes of getting a national championship for the first time in 25 years just didn't happen. It went up in smoke. Carson Beck, I think, didn't see that there was going to be safety help over the top, so he thought he had the go route. The corner that made the play, Jamari Sharp, made the interception. By the way, Jamari Sharp is the nephew of a former Miami player, so there's another storyline for you. Fernando Mendoza, he wanted to play at the University of Miami when he was little. 2-star recruit, doesn't happen. You got that storyline too. So it all comes crumbling down for Miami there. But shout out to Indiana. They get it done. Some key stats that I noticed: Miami actually averaged 6.4 yards per play. Indiana only 4.4. So Miami's defense, they kept the Canes in this game, which, when you see those yards per play, you're wondering, wait, how did Indiana actually win this game? It wasn't all perfect for Indiana. They were kind of sloppy at times, and Miami was just doing a good job keeping their team in this. Overall, Indiana wins because the efficiency on third down. Indiana was 6 of 15. Miami 3 of 11. They had some clutch plays on third down. Indiana. Indiana ran 72 plays to Miami's 53. Time of possession difference: Indiana had over 36 minutes time of possession to Miami, being under the 23 to 24 minute mark. So Indiana just had ball control time. Miami wanted to have that kind of game. They wanted to control the pace. They wanted to run the ball and keep the ball away from Indiana. Indiana flipped the script. Penalties: Miami, once again, the penalty bug got them. 7 penalties for 60 yards. Indiana overall was able to play cleaner football, except for that false start penalty that comes to mind, where it was 2nd and 1 for Indiana, and a false start happens, pushes them back to 2nd and 6, and Miami's able to force a field goal. That could have potentially cost Indiana the game, and it happened with the lineman of the year for Indiana. How about the trench war? I mean, Miami's defensive line, I thought, was phenomenal. They pressured Mendoza all night. They were all over the backfield. They sapped him 3 times, multiple hits. Some of them were a little dirty. Let's be real. And they forced Indiana into quick throws that they didn't want to settle for, and that helped get Indiana off the field. So a victory to Miami's defensive line. The Indiana offensive line didn't dominate, but they did just enough. They held up on the biggest plays needed. So not the prettiest night from Indiana's offensive line, but it was enough. Key moments, that 4th and 5 conversion, the protection holes just long enough, which led to Mendoza's touchdown. I already referenced that earlier. Miami's offensive line, like I said, they struggled in the first half, but they only allowed 1 sack, open lanes for a 57-yard Fletcher touchdown. They played, in my opinion, extremely well overall. You know, they didn't come out with a win, but credit to Miami's offensive line. Indiana's defensive front, they didn't rack up a ton of sacks, but they played gap sound for the most part. You had that, explosive play of 57 yards. And I think their effectiveness started to dwindle when Miami started to go hurry up in the second half. Miami was getting some big explosive plays running down the field when they were in hurry up mode. So maybe that was the secret all along. Just go hurry up against Indiana. But I digress. They prevented consistent success on the ground. Some plays Miami was able to get a first down, but then in others they're held to 2nd and 8, 2nd and 10. So they couldn't get comfortable with the run game all night. Both lines won battles, but Indiana won the moments. At the end of the day, I think that's what happened. Both lines won battles, but Indiana won the moments, the big ones. So yeah, that is my take on the game. Again, we talk about the legacy of this. Indiana, 16-0. Curt Cignetti doing this in just a few years. Their first national championship ever. Greatest turnaround in modern college football. And again, we talk about the budget increase, $24 million to $61 million for the Indiana football program. That's the commitment that they took, and it pays off when you hire a guy like Curt Cignetti. The portal and development blueprint has been validated. The Big Ten. How about the Big Ten? This is their 3rd straight national championship here. The SEC, they were dominant for over a decade. The mid to late 2000s into the middle 2010s. It was the SEC's game. And I think with the NIL, it has kind of opened the entire country to all the talent that is coming out of the South. A lot of the kids in the South would end up just going to the schools that were closest to them. But I think with this NIL and transfer portal, we're seeing them go far and wide as a result, because schools in the Big Ten, they got a lot of money to play with. Notre Dame, they've got a lot of money to play with. We talk about endowments. I saw a number somewhere that Notre Dame, for example, has $18 billion in endowments. University of Alabama has roughly $2.5 billion. So suddenly the playing field has seemingly shifted. That's not to say that the SEC isn't going to continue to have success. That's not to say the SEC isn't a deep conference, but the balance of power has shifted in college football. And now programs like Indiana are suddenly thinking, oh, that's what happens when you invest in your football program. So maybe we're going to start seeing a lot more spending from these programs across the country. And again, Coach Cignetti said it best. We've seen the power shift in college football. He said it here.
I think that's called a paradigm shift. It's kind of like people can cling to an old way of thinking, categorizing teams as this or that, or conferences as this or that. Or they can adjust to the new world, the shift of the power balance, the way college football is today. So, I think to look back at what happened to Indiana previous to us coming 10, 20, 50 years ago, strictly lacked a commitment from the top. That's it, plain and simple, nothing else. And we have a commitment, okay? And the other thing I'd like to say also is this. This team went all the way. This was chapter 2 in the book, okay? And very close team, special team. The first team never got the national credit it was due because of the controversy over the playoffs, the way we played the last 2.5 quarters against Ohio State and Notre Dame. That team got it all started, never trailed till the 9th game of the year. And when they did up at Michigan State, 10-0 first quarter, scored 47 straight. Started out 10-0, but never really got its due. And that was a special team.
He said it best himself. So this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. This was belief, development, and execution meeting at the exact right moment, and Indiana struck gold. We'll see you next time.